has been sending warplanes near Taiwan at an unprecedented rate. Is China warming up for war? Today I speak with a top China military expert at Stanford University who is also a strategic planner for the United States Air Force Reserve. Oriana Skylar Mastro believes Beijing could attack Taiwan soon. I asked her why she recently testified to U.S. Congress that she believes China could attack Taiwan within 2 years.
I think a lot of the wisdom that China would never want to risk a war with the United States is somewhat outdated. China, of course, of the 1990s, when we had the third Taiwan Strait crisis, and the United States sailed 2 aircraft battle groups in the vicinity of the Taiwan Strait, China backed down. But that was largely because it did not have the military power to persevere, and it also didn't have the economic and political power to protect itself from costs of use of force. That's no longer the case. China has basically embarked on a foreign policy strategy to ensure that countries, for the most part, would stay out of a Taiwan issue. And they've embarked on a very impressive military reform campaign, which for a component of it ended in 2020. And so now they do have the ability to take Taiwan by force. So this, coupled with Xi Jinping's statements, which suggests that he would like to resolve the issue sooner rather than later, points to a change, in my mind, of China's emphasis away from peaceful reunification towards a policy of armed reunification.
Well, that's pretty sobering for us here in Taiwan. What about people in the U.S. Government? Do you think that they're taking this threat seriously?
I think that they are taking the threat seriously, but they tend to misdiagnose what the problem is. So I think there's a general understanding that U.S. deterrence against China has weakened, but a lot of the focus has been on U.S. resolve. Can we credibly signal to Beijing that the United States is willing to defend Taiwan? But I think Beijing's uncertainty is no longer about the United States' willingness to fight. It's about the United States' ability to fight. And so the focus also needs to be building and demonstrating the capabilities to prevail in a conflict if Beijing decides to use force.
So what does the U.S. need to do in that respect?
Well, we get into some maybe technical details, but one of the first things the United States needs to do is have more land-based missiles, probably in the second island chain. So a lot of people think that if the war is costly for China, they won't do it. I disagree with that. I think if China gets Taiwan, even if it costs them their navy, they're willing to take that risk. And so I really think we need to focus on developing military capabilities designed to physically stop the Chinese from sailing across the strait. So something like having missile capabilities that you could saturate the strait with missiles would be sufficient to stop that type of amphibious landing. So that's where I think initially the focus should be.
And is the Biden administration on that?
I think the Biden administration is focused on that to a certain degree. One of the issues is that changes in platforms and force postures take time. And so the question is, while the United States is trying to revamp its deterrent in the region, what can we do politically, economically, or diplomatically to also convince Beijing that this is not the right move? And I do think that if Xi Jinping thought that an attack on Taiwan could threaten China's rejuvenation, for example, if he thought that U.S. allies and partners would cut off trade ties indefinitely with Beijing if they attacked Taiwan, he wouldn't do it. Right? China's trade, over 60% of it depends on the United States and its allies. The problem is that China has basically set up a foreign policy strategy to convince other countries that Taiwan is a unique case. How China treats Taiwan should not be taken as indicative of, what type of country China is. And so I think a lot of people within the Chinese government think, for the most part, countries will stay out. So we have to be able to signal that, no, the world after an attack on Taiwan will not be favorable towards Beijing.
Well, we do see some statements, like coming out of G7, and that they are really concerned about peace in the Taiwan Strait. Do you think that statements like these are helping deter China?
Of course, the willingness to speak out is the first step, because even that Beijing has tried to basically deter not only governments, but companies, individuals. China has a very strong position on Taiwan and demands that everyone at every level adheres to that position. So of course, speaking out against some of Chinese activities is the first step, but I think, more has to be done, including, increasing Taiwan's international space. For too long, the United States, other countries have been afraid of provoking Beijing. And so they have been willing to accept Chinese terms when it comes to Taiwan. The silver lining of my assessment, if there is one, is that China is not going to use force until it feels like it's 100% militarily ready. What this means is that these attempts of the United States or other countries to increase Taiwan's international space, our connectivity, delegations, what have you, this is not going to be sufficient to spark a war. So I think we can be less fearful that our relationships with Taiwan are going to push us over the precipice.
Yeah, we do see relationships between the United States and Taiwan improving. But you did mention 2 years in Taiwan. Why 2 years?
So I think, a lot of these timelines are somewhat arbitrary. I do think China just finished this military reform program in 2020. So they're now technically capable of conducting the exact type of joint operation that would be necessary to take Taiwan with an amphibious landing. But they haven't fought a war since 1979. I think they probably want some time to do more realistic exercises, maybe even a smaller scale assault. My bets are on a Vietnamese held island in the South China Sea if I had to place them, but do something small scale to learn some lessons, really hone that command and control before you go after something big like Taiwan. Now, that's a very sort of American view of, I think they want to be as ready as humanly possible. When I talk to Chinese military personnel, they seem to think that they're ready now. So I think and then there's other US experts that think they won't be fully ready for a couple of years. I had a colleague just recently on Twitter sort of argue against my position, saying China doesn't have enough landing platforms. A lot of what is enough to give you confidence can be very country-based. The United States likes to have a lot and be extremely confident before we do everything. China might be more confident with less. So we have to keep that in mind too as we're making our assessments.
So do you think that the U.S. is determined to deter China, or what is your assessment on the U.S. attitude?
I do. I mean, I think that the United States does have the willingness and the resolve to not only defend Taiwan, but to stand up against coercion and aggressiveness more broadly. It is very hard to predict the will of the American people. I think even a US president can't predict that. But time and time again, the American people seem to believe that they should use, US strength to protect those that cannot protect themselves. So I'm confident that if push came to shove, that would be the US position on the issue.
Really? Well, what do you think we should be doing here in Taiwan?
Well, there's a number of things. There is this general debate about the resiliency of the people of Taiwan. So one of the questions for a US domestic audience is, why should we be willing to sacrifice so much to defend Taiwan if the people of Taiwan aren't willing to make those sacrifices? So some things that come up, for example, is how much Taiwan spends on its defense budget, or whether they pass certain arms sales packages through the legislature, or even moving from to an all-volunteer professional force, the fact that not enough people in Taiwan are willing to sign up for military service. These create signals in the United States of, why should we be sending our people over there to fight if the people of Taiwan are not willing to fight for their own freedom? And so it is much more of a psychological component. Of course, we can talk about the physical ability of Taiwan to defend itself in the face of Chinese aggression. But I think some of these psychological things really do matter. If the United States is going to come to the aid of Taiwan, the first thing that's necessary is that Taiwan is willing to defend itself.
Well, Taiwan also has, 2 parties. The opposition party is one of them. I say quite friendly to China. Do you think that Xi Jinping could try to wait it out until the next time they're in office?
Yeah, of course. People always say, does China prefers to resolve this issue peacefully? And I agree. I mean, countries prefer to get whatever they want fighting wars. But looking at the trends in Taiwan, and I'm not an expert on Taiwan politics, but it seems like the re-election of Tsai Ing-wen, the opinion polls of Taiwan identity seem to suggest that unless there's PRC boots on the ground, I don't see the people of Taiwan giving up their freedom anytime soon. Now, maybe that is an incorrect assessment, but that's the way I see it. And I think more and more people in Beijing are starting to see it that way, that, peaceful reunification and also coercive efforts short of war can get you farther along towards reunification, but they can't get you all the way there.
So if China attacked Taiwan and if the U.S. Helped defend Taiwan, what do you think would happen? Do you think we would win or China would win?
It completely depends on the scenario. So the U.S. military is far superior to the Chinese military, but wars are not won and lost on that alone. The nearest part of the Taiwan Strait is 80 miles, right? China could possibly get to Taiwan, occupy Taiwan, sign a peace treaty with the government of Taiwan before the United States even gets there. And then it's going to be very difficult for a U.S. president to fire on China if no war is currently ongoing, right? So there are various strategic and political situations that would make it difficult for the United States to be able to bear resources it needs to prevail. If for whatever reason the United States gets adequate warning, is able to amass forces in the region, or if the war becomes protracted in some way, then I think the United States has the advantage. But Chinese strategists also know that. And that's why they're primarily designing campaigns for quick fait accompli victories.
Wow. And what do you imagine that to look like?
So some Chinese sources have put that in a number of hours, that they could take complete control of Taiwan in 100 hours. I've seen in some Chinese sources. There was a RAND war game that estimated it more in a number of days, or at the high end, a number of weeks. But when it comes to planning major military operations, that's relatively quick, and it could be a lot longer before the United States can actually physically come to Taiwan's aid. And that's why it's so important that Taiwan is able to defend itself. I don't think anyone has the expectation that Taiwan can defeat the PRC. The question is, how long can Taiwan hold out to give the United States time to come to its aid? And even small increments, like an extra week or two, could be the difference between victory and defeat.
Now, some people say that our semiconductor industry is a big factor in politics. So what do you think that factor is in terms of the possibility of war?
I think many people give many reasons why it's important to defend Taiwan. For some, it is the strategic reasons of being a key source of those chips, or preventing China from having Taiwan as a base from which they could then project power further out. For other people, it is more about values, about protecting democracy and discouraging, aggressive behavior more broadly. I think the bottom line is that, my sense is that the arguments about the strategic value of Taiwan have been less successful at garnering support for Taiwan than potentially some of the emotional ones. So if I were to give advice to Taiwan government officials, I would say, focus less on the rational strategic reasons and more on the reasons in which we all sort of feel at our hearts, which is that, countries should not be rewarded for aggression. And that is the nature of the international system that the United States has set up to avoid exactly these types of behaviors. And so what type of world do we want to live in? One in which you're rewarded for aggression, or one in which you're not?
Well, can you describe public sentiment in America towards China and Taiwan at this point?
Well, I think in general, the United States, we are an exaggerated people. We're not very good at moderation in general, so we went from not even, being concerned about China at all to, in my mind, kind of overestimating the threat in some ways. Of course, to the people of Taiwan, China is a major military threat, but in some cases, the way that the threat is characterized in the United States is a bit overboard. Like, I don't think China is trying to topple democracies or spread, authoritarianism. I don't think China is trying to project military power all over the world. I think China's goals in the region are particularly problematic, and the United States should counter them. But there has been this sort of shift towards a more exaggerated viewpoint, and assigning more nefarious intentions to China that maybe exist. I think we have conflicting interests. China wants to be able to exercise its power in ways that they see as beneficial to themselves, but I don't see, China as a sort of evil country or something of that sort. It's just that this is politics. This is great power competition. And so I see it as much more of a pragmatic sense, perhaps, than the current domestic political environment in the United States allows for.
Well, what about about public sentiment and understanding of Taiwan? Because we're kind of a small country. I don't know how many people in the US really know what Taiwan is all about.
I think probably the knowledge in the United States of Taiwan is relatively like minimal compared to, now our government is very focused on China. So more and more the American people are exposed to ideas and viewpoints about China, and probably much less so about Taiwan. And so this is maybe one of the reasons why increasing Taiwan international space and interactions and ties between the United States and Taiwan is so important.
Do you think that the US would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacks? I think that's what we say about most of it now.
Oh, I think absolutely. I think that's something, the big question is, if we have enough time to do what's necessary to achieve our goals. But, a lot of people who argue otherwise, it might also be a generational thing. The US military of today, these are people who have volunteered and signed up, that have a vision of the world that they're willing to sacrifice their lives to protect. This isn't, Vietnam era America. And so I do see very strong morale and very strong willingness in the United States to do, what is right. And so I have full confidence that my country would come to the aid of Taiwan and to other allies and partners in the region. The question is, how costly is that going to be?
Well, thank you so much, Oriana, for speaking with me about a very important issue. If you were living in Taiwan, would you be nervous and scared?
Maybe not right now, but maybe in 2 or 3 years from now.
Well, thanks so much.